A strange dissonance pulsed through the roots of the great elder tree. Ilara, a young dryad, felt it as a physical ache, a wrongness in the forest's hidden song that only she could perceive. This was not the gentle hum of growth, but a fractured rhythm, threatening the ancient balance of her entire world. By the end of her journey, you will understand how even the most broken connections can be healed through courage and empathy. What secret grief could cause a forest to turn against its own harmony, and what would it demand of one who tried to mend it? What does true balance actually sound like? The dissonant hum led Ilara to a clearing she had once known as vibrant, a place now smothered in silence. The emerald moss underfoot was bleached to a brittle gray, crumbling to dust with every step she took. Kneeling, she pressed her palms to the cold earth, reaching for the mycelial threads that should have been thrumming with life. She poured her own energy into the network, a gentle pulse of pure healing intent. But the forest's wound did not absorb her gift. It repelled it violently. A shock of searing pain shot up her arms, and she jerked her hands back to see her fingertips glowing with an angry, scorched light. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the shadows of a fallen log. An ancient badger spirit emerged, its eyes blazing with territorial fury. It saw not a healer, but an intruder tampering with its home. Ilara scrambled backward as it charged, the earth shaking with its rage. Her own attempt to mend had only provoked a deeper defense. Fleeing through the skeletal trees, the sting in her hand was a brutal lesson. This was not a simple sickness to be soothed. It was a deep, aggressive resistance, a willful turning away from the very harmony she offered. Her flight ended at the edge of a whispering brook, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She stared at the faint, luminous scar on her skin. She could not face this fracture alone. Her methods, born of instinct, were inadequate. There was only one place left to seek answers, a name spoken only in fearful tones by the elder dryads, the Grove of Whispers. It was a repository of forgotten lore, a place where the trees themselves spoke secrets, but the path was perilous, reserved for those desperate enough to listen. With the badger's furious cries still echoing in the distance, Ilara knew the journey to the grove would test her resolve like never before. A wall of twisting mist marked the grove's entrance, shimmering with a light that seemed to swallow all sound. Ilara stepped forward, but a figure solidified from the fog, barring her path. It was Kalin, a guardian woven from ancient bark and stern purpose, his eyes like chips of frozen sap. He did not speak, but a single, gnarled finger pointed past his shoulder to where a labyrinth of vines churned and writhed, their thorns glistening. They did not move at random. They pulsed with a soft, melodic hum, a sound that seemed to listen. Kalin's silent challenge was clear. To pass, she must walk the path they made, and the vines would only part for a heart in perfect balance. Her first step was too quick, born of lingering fear from the badger's attack. The vines reacted instantly, their hum turning to a dissonant shriek as they lashed out, tightening into a cage of thorns around her. She froze, her heart hammering. Brute force was useless here. She could not fight this maze any more than she could fight the forest's sorrow. Closing her eyes, she forced herself to breathe, to push the panic down. What did these vines want to hear? They reacted not to action, but to intent. She remembered a melody, an old growth song her grandmother had hummed to saplings, a tune of deep roots and patient sunlight. Softly, hesitantly, she began to hum. The change was immediate. The shrieking softened to a wary murmur. The constricting vines loosened their grip, their thorns retracting. As she poured her genuine calm into the melody, projecting not a demand to pass but an offering of harmony, the labyrinth began to untangle itself before her. A path unfurled, petals soft and glowing, leading through the mist. Kalin gave a slow, solemn nod, stepping aside. She had passed his test, but the victory felt fragile. As the last of the singing vines receded, a deeper, more profound silence within the grove awaited, a quiet so heavy it felt like a presence, hinting at secrets long guarded from the outside world. The profound silence of the grove was not empty, but layered, like pages of a book, pressed together for centuries. At its heart stood a figure that made Alara's breath catch. It was a dryad sage, but not as she knew them. It was a statue of gleaming amber, its form captured mid-reach, its face a mask of serene knowledge frozen for eternity. Its consciousness, she realized with a tremor, was not gone. It slept within the crystalline sap, a single, fragile memory shard glowing at its core. To learn what had been lost, she would have to take it. Her hands trembled as she reached out. One careless touch, one surge of fear, and the ancient record could dissolve into meaningless dust. She focused on the calm melody that had calmed the vines, letting it steady her fingers as they closed around the shard. The moment her skin made contact, the grove vanished. A symphony of connection exploded in her mind. She saw the forest not as separate trees, but as a single, vibrant entity. Sunlight was a shared currency, passed from the highest leaf to the deepest root. Water was a communal gift, and warnings of distant storms traveled through the fungal networks faster than the wind. This was the original song, a harmony so profound it felt like a physical warmth, a belonging so complete it brought tears to her eyes. Then the vision shifted. It was this perfect unity that caused the fracture. The memory showed not a monster or a blight, but a deliberate, sorrowful withdrawal. A powerful spirit, wounded by a loss the vision did not name, had made a choice. It had severed its own roots from the network, building walls of silence around its heart. It was an act of profound isolation, a single note refusing to resonate, and that single refusal began a cascade of silence that spread like a chill. The return to the present was a physical shock. The gray, silent clearing she had fled felt 1,000 times more desolate now that she had known its true potential. The beauty of the past was a weapon, highlighting the depth of the present failure. A wave of despair threatened to crush her. It would be easier to leave, to let the memory of that perfect song be a private, painful treasure. But Alara made her choice. She gripped the shard tighter, allowing the full, agonizing contrast between what was and what is to burn into her soul. She would not look away. To heal the wound, she had to understand its origin, and the origin was not malice, but a grief that had festered in solitude. The weight of the ancient memory settled upon her, a somber guide pointing her away from the grounded roots and toward the secluded spinners of the canopy. The forest floor fell away into a world of filtered green light and swaying bridges. Alara climbed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, each handhold a test of faith in the ancient, towering trees. Far above, she could just make out the spinner's domain, a city of silver thread and shifting shadow woven between the highest branches. As she reached the final bough, a chorus of sharp clicks greeted her. The spinners emerged, their many-faceted eyes reflecting her own fearful form, their limbs poised over immense, shimmering looms that hummed with a strained, discordant energy. They saw a dryad from the troubled earth below and reacted instantly, not with words, but with action. Gossamer strands shot through the air, not to capture, but to corral, weaving a cage of sticky silk around her before she could even speak. The threads tightened, pulling her off balance, and the dizzying drop yawned beneath her feet. Panic was a cold wave, her fear of heights and confinement screaming for her to struggle, to fight her way free. But the memory of the Amber Sage's vision held her still. Force had failed with the badger, and balance had calmed the vines. She would not fight them. With a deliberate, calming breath, she reached slowly into a small, moss-lined pouch at her side. She withdrew her offering, a single dewdrop she had collected at dawn from a lotus leaf, a perfect sphere that held within it the entire, untroubled sky. It was a tiny thing, yet it resonated with a pure, stable frequency, a note of perfect morning harmony. She held it out in her open palm, a silent plea. The clicking ceased. One of the spinners, an elder with a cloak of moonlit web, approached. He leaned close, his complex eyes studying the droplet, and then her face. The hostility in the air softened from a sharp blade to a wary curiosity. He was Sila's, and his voice, when it came, was the sound of wind through harp strings. He accepted her gift, but his news was grim. He led her to one of the great looms, and she saw the problem for herself. The threads of sound, which should have been taut and vibrant, were slack and frayed. The pattern was unraveling from within. Our work is failing, he said. The dissonance is not just in the roots, it is in the air itself. The very song of the world is coming undone. We can help you trace the source of the silence, but our own power is fading. To retune our looms, we need a resonant Heartstone from the Glimmerfall Caves. It is a place of echoing chaos, where sound twists back upon itself. No spinner has ever dared to retrieve one. Bring us the crystal, and we will weave for you a thread that can lead you to the heart of this sorrow. The entrance to the Glimmerfall Caves was a gaping maw of absolute darkness, a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight. Alara stepped inside, and the familiar world vanished. The only light came from patches of ghostly fungi that did not illuminate, but swallowed whatever luminescence touched them, leaving pockets of deeper black. She was blind. Her only guides were the uneven ground beneath her feet and the constant low hum that vibrated through the air, a dissonant chord made of 1,000 overlapping frequencies. All around her, jagged crystals grew from the walls and ceiling, each one resonating with its own unstable note. A single careless movement, the scuff of her foot or the brush of her arm, would set them chiming in a chaotic, deafening cascade. She had to find one crystal, the resonant Heartstone, that sang with a single, perfect pitch amidst all this noise. She inched forward, her breath held, her hands outstretched. For a while, the tense silence held, then her elbow grazed a protruding shard. The sound was catastrophic. A single chime triggered its neighbor, which triggered another, until the entire cavern screamed with a violent, shattering symphony. Alara froze, her heart hammering in her throat. As the last echoes faded, a new sound replaced them, a slow, dragging scrape from the depths of the cave. Something was moving in the darkness, drawn by the noise. She could feel its presence, a vast, patient pressure in the air. It was a beast that had evolved in this void, hunting not by sight, but by the vibrations she was creating. She was trapped. To find the crystal, she needed to make a sound, but every sound brought the hunter closer. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Closing her eyes to the oppressive dark, she made her choice. She would have to call the beast to her. She pursed her lips and let out a soft, focused whistle, a single, clear note that cut through the chaotic hum. Instantly, the scraping quickened, closing in, but her ears, sharpened by desperation, caught an answering resonance from a cluster to her left. One crystal was not echoing her note, it was harmonizing with it, amplifying it into a pure, steady tone. She scrambled toward the sound, her hands closing around a warm, smoothly faceted stone that pulsed in time with her whistle. She had it, but as she pulled the Heartstone free, the scraping was right behind her. A hot, damp breath washed over her neck. She spun around, clutching the crystal, and saw only a hulking silhouette blotting out the faint fungal glow. There was no time for fear, only action. She slammed the Heartstone against the cavern wall. The pure, powerful note it emitted was a physical force. The surrounding crystals, unable to bear the perfect frequency, shattered. The beast recoiled with a roar of pain as a rain of crystalline shards fell, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, sealing the tunnel between them. Ilara stumbled backward, coughing in the dust-filled air, and found a sliver of daylight. She scrambled out, emerging into the open air, the precious crystal clutched tightly in her stinging hand. Gasping, she looked down at the forest canopy below. The victory felt hollow. The vibrant greens she remembered were washed out, tinged with a sickly yellow-gray. The dissonance was not contained. It was spreading, a visible stain seeping through the world. The climb back to the spinner's realm felt heavier than the ascent. The resonant Heartstone, a leaden weight of hope in Ilara's palm. Silas and the others were waiting, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the crystal with a mixture of desperation and awe. Without a word, they guided her to the shuddering heart of their largest loom. The air crackled with unstable energy as they began the delicate work, their many limbs moving in a complex dance around the central spindle. Ilara's role was to hold the Heartstone in a specific position, her hands acting as a living anchor point, while the spinners wove strands of pure moonlight and sound around it. The task demanded absolute stillness, a perfect synchronization with their rhythmic clicking. For a moment, it seemed to work. A single, clear note began to emanate from the loom, a promise of harmony. Then the entire structure bucked violently. A critical silver thread, the main warp of the tapestry, snapped taut and threatened to whip free, its frayed ends sizzling with chaotic energy. The loom screamed, a physical sound of tearing reality. The spinners recoiled, their clicks turning to panicked shrieks. The entire web of sound was on the verge of unraveling completely. There was no time for thought. Ilara threw her body forward, wrapping her arms and legs around the vibrating thread. The force was immense, a torrent of dissonance that threatened to fling her into the abyss below. It felt like holding back a hurricane with bare hands. Her muscles screamed in protest, her bones vibrating with the strain. She could feel her grip slipping, her strength leaching away with every frantic heartbeat. The spinner's panic was a tangible force, threatening to break her concentration. In that moment of utter exhaustion, she closed her eyes and reached for the one thing that was not chaos. She called upon the memory from the amber sage, the vision of the forest's perfect, original song. It flooded her mind, not as a mere recollection, but as a physical sensation of warmth and connection. She focused on that feeling, channeling it down her arms and into the thread she clung to. Her breathing slowed, matching the deep, patient rhythm of that ancient harmony. She did not fight the thread's wild energy, but instead offered it a new pattern to follow, a template of stability. "Feel the old song," she whispered, her voice a strained thread itself. "Remember the balance." The change was not instantaneous, but it was profound. The violent shuddering of the loom began to subside, the panicked clicks of the spinners softening into a wary, attentive hum. The thread in her arms ceased its fight, thrumming now with a clean, resonant power. As one, the spinners resumed their work, their movements no longer frantic, but reverent. The loom stabilized, and from its center erupted a beam of pure, silvery sound, a frequency so clean and healing that the very air seemed to wash clean. The sickly yellow tinge that had stained the canopy began to recede, but the loom's new clarity came with a terrible revelation. The beam of sound did not scatter randomly. It focused, sharpening like an arrow, and then it plunged downward, piercing through the woven branches and the very earth below, pointing unerringly to a single, dark locus of silence. The spinners fell utterly still. The fracture was not in the leaves or the air. It was deeper, anchored in the forest's most sacred core, the Heartwood. The newly humming loom was a small victory, but the path now led downward, into the roots of the world itself. The silvery beam from the spinner's loom plunged like a spear into the earth, and Alara followed it down. Her descent into the Rootways was a journey into the forest's buried soul, a labyrinth of tangled, earthen arteries where the foundational energies of the world flowed. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and ancient decay, and the only light came from the faint, fading pulse of the Heartwood ahead, a distant heartbeat growing weaker with every step. Here, the dissonance was not a sound but a pressure, a suffocating weight that made each breath a struggle. The path was treacherous. Great, gnarled roots that should have been pillars of stability were instead crumbling, their surfaces weeping a bitter, black sap that sizzled where it dripped. In places, entire tunnels had collapsed, choked shut by the viscous, dark substance that seemed to drink the light and hope from the air. She was forced to squeeze through narrow, unstable passages, her shoulders scraping against earth that felt like it could entomb her at any moment. The darkness was nearly absolute, a living entity that pressed against her eyes. Panic was a constant whisper at the edge of her mind. To push forward blindly was to risk being crushed or lost forever in this subterranean maze. She had one choice left, an act of pure trust. Kneeling, she pressed her palms to the cool, damp earth and reached out not with force, but with a question. She opened her awareness to the mycelial network, the hidden fungal web that connected all things, and she asked, her intent a silent plea, "Show me the way." For a terrifying moment, there was nothing, Then, a soft, blue luminescence began to glow along a single, thread-like filament in the soil. It pulsed gently, beckoning her forward. She followed, her heart in her throat, as the fungal guide led her away from a massive, sap-choked cavern, just before it groaned and collapsed in on itself. The mycelium was not just showing her a path, it was sharing a truth. As she moved, impressions flooded her mind, not in words, but in feelings. She felt a profound, aching loneliness, a grief so deep, it had no beginning and no end. The black sap was not some foreign poison. It was this sorrow made physical, the forest's own emotional wound festering and weeping into its veins. The very foundation of the world was being eroded not by an attack, but by a broken heart. The realization was a heavier burden than the earth above her. How do you fight a sadness that has become stone and sap? But the mycelial thread glowed on, a fragile lifeline in the overwhelming dark. Trusting the network that had already saved her, Ilara pressed on, following those faint, hopeful threads of light toward the epicenter of the sorrow. The fungal threads of light converged, their soft blue glow illuminating a vast, subterranean chamber. At its center stood the Heartwood, and the sight of it stole the breath from Ilara's lungs. This was not a tree in any ordinary sense, but the forest's living anchor, a pillar of such immense, gnarled antiquity that it seemed to hold up the very sky. Yet its bark was split, weeping the same bitter, black sap that choked the rootways. The sap flowed in thick, sluggish rivers down its trunk, pooling in a dark, shimmering moat around its base. This was the source, the poisoned wellspring of all the forest's sorrow. To reach the wound, she would have to climb its weeping form. Her first touch was agony. The sap was not merely hot, it was a corrosive misery that seared her palms, a pain that was less physical and more a raw scream against her soul. As she began her ascent, each handhold was a new wave of torment. The tree's anguish did not just burn her, it poured into her, a psychic flood of millennia of grief and isolation. It was a loneliness so vast it threatened to dissolve her own thoughts, to swallow her identity whole and leave her as just another weeping scar on the bark. Her vision blurred, her fingers slipping on the slick, dark surface. The urge to let go, to fall into the welcoming darkness and end the shared pain, was a seductive whisper. But she remembered the badger's fury and the spinner's fear, all born from this single, wounded heart. She could not fight this. To resist the pain was to be broken by it. With a final, shuddering gasp, she made her choice. At the widest fissure, the origin of the black flow, she did not try to seal it or cleanse it. Instead, she placed her burning hands directly upon the open wound and opened her own heart completely, inviting the full memory of the Heartwood's sorrow inside. The vision that engulfed her was one of tragic, misguided love. She saw the forest's ancient guardians, acting from a place of fierce protection. A great herd of migratory sky whales, beings of pure song and celestial energy, had for eons paused in their journey to rest within the forest's canopy. Their presence was a gift, a resonant harmony that strengthened the woods. But one season, a guardian, fearing the forest was becoming too dependent on these fleeting visitors, made a fateful decision. To make the forest self-sufficient, to protect it from the potential pain of loss, they wove a barrier of thorns and silence, severing the connection and driving the sky whales away forever. The act of isolation, meant to safeguard, had instead created the very emptiness it feared. The forest had turned inward, and its grief, with no outlet, had festered into this black poison. The understanding blossomed within Alara, a painful and beautiful clarity. The cure was not a spell to be cast upon the wound. It was not a battle to be won. The harmony could not be restored by tending to the Heartwood alone. The cure was a journey to find what was lost, to seek out the exiled Sky Whales and somehow convince them to return, to mend the connection that fear had broken. The wind-swept plains stretched before Alara in an endless, shimmering expanse of gold and gray. The moment her feet left the familiar, root-tangled soil of the forest, a profound disorientation washed over her. Her connection to the mycelial network, the constant hum of shared life, was gone, replaced by a deafening silence. The wind here did not whisper through leaves. It screamed across the bare stone and hardy grasses, carrying no messages she could understand. Her senses, so attuned to the forest's layered world, were rendered blunt and useless. Every rustle of grass was a potential threat, every shadow a mystery. She was utterly exposed, a creature of the deep woods stranded in a world of open sky. Her only guide was the lingering echo of the Heartwood's sorrow, a pull toward the horizon where the great Stag and his exiled herd were said to roam. But suspicion hung in the air as thick as the dust. Spirits of the plains watched from the rippling heat, their forms indistinct and fleeting. A family of stone giants paused their slow migration to turn their featureless heads toward her, their silence more accusing than any shout. She was an intruder, a reminder of the forest that had cast their kind out. To approach them with demands or even questions would be futile. She had to speak a language they would understand. Kneeling on the cracked earth, Alara closed her eyes and reached for the last reservoir of energy she possessed, the stored harmony of her home. It was a final, precious ember of the forest's song. She poured it into the barren soil, not to take, but to give. A single, impossible flower bloomed beneath her fingertips, its petals a vibrant, living green, its center holding a tiny, pulsing light. It was a peaceful offering, a testament to the life she represented, laid bare in a land of harsh survival. The small beacon of color did not go unnoticed. A young spirit fawn, its coat the color of dawn mist, stepped tentatively from behind a weather-worn rock. Its large, dark eyes held no suspicion, only a deep, wondering curiosity. It sniffed the air, then took another cautious step toward the flower and toward Alara. A fragile thread of hope tightened in her chest. This was a beginning, a chance. But in this vast openness, a gift that attracts the gentle also draws the hungry. A sharp, predatory cry sliced through the wind's constant moan. A shadow fell over them, large and swift. High above, a wind drake circled, its leathery wings cutting sharp angles against the sun. It was a creature of pure territorial instinct, and the vibrant, foreign magic of the flower was a challenge, an anomaly to be eliminated. The fawn flinched, its trusting eyes wide with sudden fear, and pressed itself against Alara's side. The hope she had felt moments before was now a dangerous beacon, and the shadow of the drake promised a coming storm. The wind drake's shadow fell over them like a shroud, its predatory cry shredding the air. Talons of sharpened stone scraped against the bedrock as it landed, its wings kicking up a blinding cloud of dust. Alara shoved the spirit fawn behind the meager cover of a boulder, her own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had no weapons, no strength to match its fury. A direct fight was a death sentence for them both. The drake lunged, not at her, but at the vibrant flower, its instinct to destroy the foreign magic that had trespassed on its domain. A gust of wind from its beating wings sent Alara stumbling backward, the force like a physical blow. She scrambled behind another rock, the fawn trembling against her leg. She was an insect in this open expanse, and the drake was a force of nature. To fight was to be broken. The memory of the Heartwood's weeping fissure flashed in her mind, a monument to the failure of isolation and defense. Her only choice was the one the forest had forgotten. She had to reach for connection, even here, in this hostile place. As the drake reared back for another scorching gust, Alara did not cower. She stood, bracing herself against the boulder, closed her eyes, and began to sing. It was not a song of power or command. It was the melody of the forest's deepest longing, the harmony she had absorbed from the Heartwood's sorrowful memory. She poured the ache of the silent canopy, the grief of the severed bond, and the desperate hope for the Sky Whales return into her voice, projecting it not as a weapon, but as a raw, vulnerable confession. The wind drake hesitated, its head cocking. The aggressive gusts faltered, replaced by a confused rumble deep in its chest. The pure, emotional resonance was a frequency it did not understand, a sound that spoke of a world beyond its territorial instincts. It was not subdued, but it was listening, its rage momentarily displaced by a primal curiosity. That moment of hesitation was all that was needed. A new sound echoed across the plains, a deep, resonant call that seemed to still the very wind. The drake's head snapped up, its eyes widening with a sudden, ancient fear. It shuffled backward, then with a final, wary screech, launched itself into the sky and fled. Alara's song died in her throat as she turned. Emerging from the shimmering heat haze was the great stag, his antlers a sprawling canopy of living crystal that caught the fading light. He was immense, a creature of the open sky and the enduring stone, and his presence carried the weight of epochs. Behind him, the forms of the rest of the herd solidified, their own crystalline hides humming with a soft, collective power. The stag's ancient eyes, deep and knowing, fixed upon her, and the vast, silent plains seemed to hold their breath. The great stag's gaze was a physical weight, ancient and unyielding. He had heard the sorrow in Alara's song, but his crystalline antlers did not dip in sympathy. His voice, when it came, was the low rumble of shifting continents. Your words are a leaf on the wind, little root walker. They prove nothing. The forest cast us out with thorns and silence. To believe it has changed requires more than a single, sorrowful melody. You ask for a homecoming, but you must first prove the home is worthy. Under the rising twin moons, you will dance with us. You will match our steps, or be swept away by them. This is our demand. The herd shifted around him, their powerful forms humming with a rhythm that felt both chaotic and deeply ordered, a language written in motion that Alara's forest-born body did not understand. Her muscles, already screaming from the climb and the flight, trembled at the prospect. This was not a request. It was an ultimatum etched in moonlight. As the twin moons crested the horizon, the ritual began. The herd started to move, a flowing river of muscle and crystal. their hooves striking the hard earth in patterns that were never the same twice. The ground vibrated, not with a simple beat, but with overlapping, unpredictable rhythms. Alara stepped into the current, her own movements clumsy and hesitant by comparison. A massive stag veered toward her, and she jumped back, her heart leaping into her throat as his powerful shoulder brushed past, the force of it nearly spinning her off her feet. This was not a dance of grace, but of survival. To try and anticipate each step was impossible, a sure path to being trampled under the thunder of 100 hooves. Her body ached, her mind frayed with exhaustion. She was failing. Then, standing breathless in the center of the swirling chaos, she remembered the singing vines of the grove. They had not responded to force, but to harmony. She closed her eyes, forcing her frantic breathing to slow. Instead of fighting the current, she stopped trying to lead. She let the vibrations in the earth travel up her legs. She opened her awareness to the push and pull of the energy generated by the herd. She stopped being a dryad, trying to mimic a stag, and became a single note, seeking its place in a greater chord. Her next step was not her own. It was an instinctual lean, a pivot that flowed seamlessly between two passing yearlings. Her arms rose not by conscious command, but as a counterbalance to the herd's collective sway. She was no longer dancing with them. She was dancing as a part of them, her individual rhythm dissolving into their magnificent, alien symphony. A new sound bloomed in the air, a resonant chime that started at the tips of the great stag's antlers and shimmered down through the entire herd. The spiritual rift that had festered for so long did not just heal, it transformed, woven anew with a thread of shared trust. The dance slowed, and the stag stood before her, his eyes now holding a glimmer of respect. "We will return," he said, his voice softer now. "But know this, healer, our song is powerful. The forest that rejected us once may not be strong enough to bear our harmony now. It must be ready, or our homecoming will shatter the very roots you seek to save." As the echo of the dance faded, the true scale of their journey unveiled itself. Leading a herd of celestial giants back through the treacherous, grieving woods would be a delicate and dangerous pilgrimage. The path back was a tightrope, strung between two worlds. Alara walked at the very front, her body a fragile boundary between the celestial power of the spirit, herd, and the volatile, wounded forest. With every step the stags took, the ground trembled, not with their weight, but with the forest's fearful recoil. The trees at the border, once familiar, were now twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches like clenched fists. Vines, thick as her arm and studded with thorns, lashed out from the shadows, not at the herd, but at her, the perceived traitor, bringing this overwhelming force into their broken sanctuary. She did not flinch or fight back. Instead, she opened her mouth and sang, a continuous, weaving melody that poured from the very core of her being. It was a song of introduction, of memory, reminding the vines of the harmony that had calmed them and whispering to the stags of the home that awaited. Her voice became a living corridor, a narrow path of calm through the churning energy. For a few precious moments it worked. The vines stilled, the trembling earth settled, and the herd moved forward, their crystalline hum a soft counterpoint to her strain. But the effort was catastrophic. She could feel her own life force bleeding into the song, siphoned away to maintain the fragile peace. Each note was a piece of her spirit given freely, and with every yard they gained, her steps grew heavier, her vision blurring at the edges. The vibrant green of her skin began to pale, leaching away like color from a dying leaf. The tree line was finally in sight, a ragged tier of darkness against the sky, but it was guarded by a swirling vortex of the forest's most concentrated anguish, a wall of thorns and bitter mist that pulsed with a defensive, furious light. The barrier was a wall of living fear, a fortress of thorns that glistened with a dark, repelling light. Each vine was thicker than Alara's whole body, woven so tightly that not a sliver of the forest beyond was visible. As the great stag took a step forward, the thorns pulsed violently, and a wave of force threw him back, his crystalline antlers ringing with a discordant chime. The forest's final defense was not just physical, it was spiritual, designed to reject the very essence of the beings it had once rejected. Alara stood trapped in the middle, the herd's growing impunity, a pressure at her back, the forest's silent, automated terror a wall before her. Her own strength was a flickering candle, nearly extinguished from the strain of the journey. To push forward was impossible, to turn back was unthinkable. There was no spell for this, no clever trick. The only tool she had left was trust, a leap of faith that demanded everything. She turned first to the great stag, her voice a threadbare whisper. You must stand down, lower your power completely. Show the forest you are not a threat. The stag's eyes flashed with primal resistance, the instinct of a sovereign being to never show vulnerability. Then her consciousness reached inward, down through her fraying connection to the weeping Heartwood, a desperate plea sent along the fading mycelial threads. Please, she begged, remember the song, remember the sky, let them in. She was asking the two wounded titans to perform an act of mutual surrender, to lay down their weapons at the exact same moment, with only her fragile hope as the signal. For one endless, suffocating second, nothing happened. The thorns seemed to grow even sharper, their dark light intensifying as if to mock her audacity. The herd shuffled restlessly, their humming growing tense. The entire quest, every sacrifice and every step, balanced on a knife's edge, ready to shatter into failure. Then, a single, glistening thorn at the very center of the wall trembled. It did not break or wither. It slowly, deliberately, curled back into itself, retracting like a finger unclenching from a fist. A sliver of the darkened forest beyond became visible. Another thorn followed, and then another, the motion spreading outwards in a silent, unfolding wave. The wall of fear was not being broken. It was being willingly dismantled, vine by vine, as the forest itself began to remember the old connection. The last thorn retracted, and a path opened into the heart of the silent woods. Alara led the spirit herd through the gap, their crystalline forms casting strange, beautiful lights upon the grieving trees. They were met at the clearing of the Heartwood by a tense, silent gathering. The spinners stood on their high branches, their looms still. The tree guardians, including the once furious badger spirit, stood with hackles raised, and all the other beings of the forest watched from the shadows. The air itself felt like glass, charged with a volatile mix of ancient grief, fragile hope, and deep-seated suspicion. One startled movement, one spark of remembered anger, and the entire fragile piece would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Alara, her form pale and almost translucent from the effort of the journey, stepped into the center of that charged silence. She did not raise her voice in plea, or explanation. Words had brought them to the brink, but they would not carry them across. Instead, she closed her eyes, found the last ember of her strength, and began to move. It was the dance of the plains, the complex, flowing language of steps and leans she had learned under the twin moons. It was an invitation written in motion, a silent plea for unity. For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest held its breath, watching this strange, slow ritual from a world it had rejected. Then, a single spinner, the elder Silas, detached a strand of silver thread and began to weave it in time with her movements. A young tree guardian, its fear overcome by curiosity, took a hesitant step and then another, mirroring her pivot. The great stag, his head held high, let out a low, resonant hum and began the slow, powerful steps of his own people, his immense form moving with a sudden, surprising grace. One by one, they joined. The dance was clumsy at first, a collection of mismatched rhythms and alien motions, but as they continued, something shifted. They were not mimicking each other, but finding a new rhythm together, a third song that was neither forest nor plain, but something entirely new born from their willingness to try. The clearing filled with a moving tapestry of reconciliation, a living testament to a harmony reforged. The dance built into a powerful, shared rhythm, and its vibrations seeped deep into the soil, traveling down through the dark earth to touch the wounded roots below. The collective rhythm of the dance became a single, thrumming heartbeat that shook the very air. This shared harmony coalesced into a visible torrent of pure, golden energy, a river of light swirling above the clearing. Every being present, from the smallest spirit to the great stag himself, was pouring their renewed connection into this reservoir of power. But energy alone was not enough. It needed a focus, a channel to carry it to the source of the wound. Alara, standing at the epicenter, knew with a chilling certainty what she had to do. She raised her arms, and the entire swirling mass of light descended upon her. It was not a gentle embrace. It was an avalanche. The energy tore into her, a fire that burned without consuming, a pressure that threatened to splinter her spirit into 1,000 shards. Her body, already weakened to translucency, became a lens concentrating the hopes of an entire world. She could feel every fiber of her being screaming in protest, her vision whiting out with the sheer, agonizing force of the flow. To let go would be a relief, a release into peaceful nothingness, but she saw the faces in the dance, the trust in the stag's eyes, the memory of the black sap weeping from the Heartwood. She understood this pain was not a punishment. It was the necessary friction, the intense pressure required to transmute centuries of festering grief back into the raw potential for growth. She was the conduit, and she had to hold, so she rooted herself, not in the earth, but in the unified song surrounding her. She drew strength from the spinner's silver threads, the badger's grounded stance, the stag's resonant hum. Their support became an anchor in the storm, a tether keeping her from being utterly annihilated by the power she channeled. With a final, monumental effort of will, she directed the entire concentrated beam of golden light down into the Heartwood's deepest fissure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a visible shockwave erupted. The flow of black sap ceased instantly, its bitter river drying up as if it had never been. The weeping crack in the ancient trunk sealed over, not with a scar, but with bark of a vibrant, impossible green, pulsing with soft inner light. A wave of this revitalizing energy radiated outward from the Heartwood, a visible ripple of color and life. Gray moss flushed with emerald vitality, skeletal branches swelled with new buds, and the very air lost its oppressive weight, filling with the scent of rain and rich soil. As the last of the healing pulse subsided, a profound and absolute silence fell. It was not the dead silence of before, but a quiet of breathless anticipation, a collective holding of breath. And then it came. A single, clear, harmonious note rang out from the forest itself, a sound of perfect balance that had been lost for a generation, pure and triumphant in the stillness. The harmony did not mean the work was over. In the days that followed the great healing, the forest echoed with the sound of a new kind of labor. Alara stood with the great stag, their gazes tracing the dense canopy. For the spirit heard to live within the woods themselves had to change. Their migratory paths, essential to their celestial rhythm, required broad, sun-dappled clearings and arched pathways through the trees. This meant reshaping the ancient, tangled architecture of the forest. It was a project of immense physical effort and delicate negotiation. Dryads who had guarded their specific groves for centuries had to agree to let certain ancient trees be gently guided aside. The stags, in turn, had to learn the patience of the root, moving with a slow deliberation that was foreign to their plains-born natures. They did not command the forest to bend. They asked it to grow in a new direction, and the labor of doing it together, of hauling soil and weaving living branches, forged bonds stronger than any treaty. Old instincts, however, ran deep. A young stag, full of restless energy, once charged through a newly sown meadow, trampling a spinner's freshly laid web of morning dew. The resulting clash of clicks and furious bellows threatened to unravel a week's progress. Alara found herself not as a conduit of immense power, but as a mediator, her voice a calm thread weaving through the anger, reminding the stag of the forest's fragility and the spinner of the herd's need for space to run. These small eruptions were constant reminders that the balance was not a state to be achieved, but a practice to be maintained, a conversation that required every voice. It was after one such tense mediation, her hands still smudged with earth and her spirit weary, that Alara made her quiet decision. She looked from the steadfast Heartwood to the powerful, restless forms of the stags, and she knew her journey was not meant to end in a return to her old life. She would not be a wanderer or a hero, but a guardian of the bridge itself. She chose to remain at the Heartwood as a permanent liaison, a living root connecting the two worlds. Her dedication was a testament to the new truth they had all learned, that true growth was not about building walls of static protection, but about the messy, beautiful, and constant work of remaining open to change. Her new role was clear, a purpose that filled her days with meaning, but a final, deeply personal challenge awaited her, one that called her back to the mist-shrouded entrance of the Grove of Whispers. The mists of the Grove of Whispers felt different now, not a barrier of judgment, but a veil of quiet contemplation. Alara found Kalin waiting exactly where she had left him, his bark-like form a stoic silhouette against the shifting fog. She did not speak of victory or healing, but simply stated her purpose, her voice calm and clear. "I have come to seek your blessing as Harmonizer." Kalin's frozen sap eyes regarded her, and the ancient law that bound him stirred. A final trial was required, not of the body, but of the spirit. He did not move, but his consciousness reached out and touched hers, a silent, immense pressure, testing the very core of her resolve. It was a battle fought in the space between thoughts. Kalin's will was a fortress of tradition, a rigid structure built on millennia of isolation and defensive strength. He pressed against her mind, demanding proof that this new unity was not a fleeting weakness. Alara did not build a wall to meet him. Instead, she opened every door within herself, holding nothing in reserve. She showed him the memory of the spirit fawn's trust, the raw vulnerability of her song before the wind drake, and the terrifying, beautiful moment she had channeled the entire forest's hope. She let him feel the exhaustion in her bones and the lingering doubt that she was worthy of this role. Most importantly, she projected the living tapestry of the present, the great stag's patient hum woven with the spinner's silver threads, the badger spirit now resting in a sun-dappled clearing created by the herd's passage. She showed him not a perfect, conflict-free world, but a resilient, adapting one, stronger for its diversity. The pressure in her mind intensified, a final, probing surge from the ancient guardian. To reject it would be to admit fear. To fight back would be to embrace the old ways of conflict. Alara stood perfectly still in both body and spirit, a conduit of shared experience, her own identity, a single thread in the vast, interconnected web she presented. She was not defending a position, she was offering an invitation. For a long, breathless moment, the silent struggle held, the fate of her authority, and the fragile new era balancing on the edge of his perception. Then, the immense pressure vanished. Kalin's stern expression softened, the deep fissures in his bark-like face seeming to relax into something resembling peace. He did not speak. Instead, he offered a deep, respectful bow, his silence more powerful and affirming than any words could ever be. This acceptance from the grove's most steadfast sentinel was a seal of legitimacy, a signal to every watching traditionalist that the path of connection was now the forest's true law. As he straightened, his gaze turned from her toward the heart of the woods, as if seeing it anew, and the mists around them seemed to shimmer with a faint, approving light. The first council gathered under the Heartwood's newly vibrant boughs, a living mosaic of clashing perspectives. The great stag's resonant hum vibrated through the air, while the spinners communicated in sharp, rhythmic clicks that set the tree guardians on edge. The badger spirit, representing the root dwellers, simply grunted and pointed, its language one of earth and instinct. The Mycelial network's representative, a soft, glowing fungus that pulsed with slow light, offered no words at all. Initial attempts at communication were a cacophony of misunderstanding. The stag's request for sky paths was interpreted by the dryads as a demand to clear-cut the canopy, causing immediate outrage. The spinners' need for undisturbed, silent zones for their looms was seen by the herd as a selfish restriction on their movement. Chaos threatened to fracture the fragile peace before it could even solidify. Alara, watching the discord with a familiar ache, did not raise her voice. Instead, she called for a shared silence. She asked every being, from the smallest sprite to the stag himself, to still their voices and simply feel. To place a hand upon the earth, a hoof on a root, or a thread upon the bark, and listen. In that collective pause, the forest's unified pulse became audible, a deep, steady rhythm that flowed through them all, a common ground beneath their differences. The silence was not empty. but full of a shared belonging that transcended language. When the talking resumed, the tension had softened. They began to find clumsy but effective ways to translate their needs, using fallen leaves to map the sky paths and vibrating the earth to demonstrate the disruptive frequencies the spinners feared. This first stumbling council achieved something monumental. They established a basic but functional system for sharing warnings of approaching storms and distributing sunlight and water resources where they were most needed. The successful formation of this council created a living framework, a promise that no part of the forest would ever have to face a crisis in isolation again. As the meeting adjourned and the representatives returned to their domains, a new sound filled the air, not the old, perfect harmony of a bygone age, but the coordinated, gentle hum of a forest in active, conscious balance. Months after the council's first tentative meetings, a new structure began to take shape in the high branches near the spinner's domain. It was a loom of impossible scale, its frame woven from living wood and strands of solidified moonlight. Upon it, Silas and his people worked with a feverish intensity, their project fueled by a radical new inspiration. They were not using their traditional silks. Instead, they worked with materials gifted from every corner of the new alliance, threads of shed spirit light from the stags that glimmered with celestial energy, and fibers spun from the forest's most vibrant, newly sprung leaves, still humming with the Heartwood's vitality. Their goal was to weave the entire story, the fracture and the healing, into a single grand tapestry. The technical challenges were immense. The spirit light threads were slippery and resisted the tight, structured patterns the spinners were known for, while the leaf fibers were delicate and prone to snapping under the tension required to hold the stag's power. The perfectionist spinners, whose craft demanded flawless symmetry, fell into bitter arguments. The tapestry, they feared, was becoming a chaotic mess, a visual cacophony that dishonored the very story it was meant to tell. Ilara climbed to their realm and did not offer solutions. She simply sat at the edge of the great loom, asking silent permission to learn. For days, she worked as their humble apprentice, her dryad hands learning the rhythm of the shuttles, her touch helping to gently coax the rebellious spirit light to intertwine with the resilient leaf fibers. She did not command, she facilitated, showing them how the different energies could be blended, not forced, creating a new texture that was both strong and fluid. The final moment of weaving was a held breath for the entire forest. When the last thread was tied, the completed tapestry shimmered into being. It was not a picture of perfect, ordered lines. It was a dynamic, flowing scene where the dark, jagged threads of the fracture were visibly mended by the brilliant, interwoven colors of the herd and the forest, a testament to repair, not erasure. And it did more than just hang there. It emitted a low, harmonious frequency, a steady, grounding hum that resonated through the branches and down into the roots, becoming a new, physical anchor for the piece. This was not a symbol of a fragile truce, but proof of a resilient, beautiful creation born from the very diversity that had once caused such fear. Standing before the finished work, Ilara felt a profound sense of completion, as if a final, necessary chapter had been written into the world. Yet, as she listened, the forest's song continued to shift around her, a living melody that was ever evolving, promising not an end, but a new and endless beginning. The forest's new harmony was a living presence, a gentle vibration in the air and earth, but deep within that steady hum, A different frequency brushed against Alara's awareness, a subtle pull from beneath the soil. Kneeling, she pressed her palm to the moss, and the mycelial network responded not with its usual flow of shared resources, but with a distinct, urgent image. It was a vision of distant, jagged peaks, their stone hearts echoing with a familiar, fractured song, a dissonance that mirrored their own forest's former sorrow. The message was clear. Their healing was not an isolated event, but a single note in a global symphony of distress. A cold dread pooled in her stomach, followed by an undeniable pull to journey toward that distant cry. How many other worlds were suffering in silence? Yet, as she looked around at the bustling, interconnected life of her home, she saw the delicate threads of their new alliance. The great stag was still learning the language of the roots, and the spinner's new tapestry was only just beginning to stabilize the air. To leave now, while their own balance was so new, would be to risk everything they had fought for. Her duty was not to race toward the next crisis, but to ensure this one would not recur in her absence. She would not go to the mountains, not yet. Instead, she began to gather a small, dedicated group, a dryad with a keen ear for the soil, a young stag spirit with a patient heart, even the once suspicious badger. She started to teach them the subtle art of listening, of translating between different forms of life, of becoming conduits for understanding. She was planting the seeds of future harmonizers, sharing the burden so the forest would never again depend on a single savior. The knowledge of that distant suffering transformed her entire understanding of the quest. It was no longer about saving one home, but about tending to the health of an entire world, a mission that stretched far beyond the horizon. The work of harmony, she now understood, was a journey without a final destination, and her next step was to ensure others could walk the path beside her. A sharp bark broke the afternoon calm, and a flash of russet fur darted from the undergrowth to skid to a halt before Alara. It was Kale, the young fox spirit whose initial response to the stags had been a chorus of defiant snarls. Now his ears were flattened not in anger, but in a gesture of desperate supplication. "Teach me," he blurted out, his voice a frantic mix of pride and need. "Teach me to hear what you hear. I want to protect this, but my barks only make the leaves tremble." Alara felt a profound weariness war with a flicker of possibility. To teach meant to dissect the very instincts that had saved them, to put words to a language that had always lived in her bones. The first lessons were a struggle of mismatched rhythms. Kale's energy was a scattered fire, his attempts to sense the forest's mood as subtle as a thunderclap. When two root gnawers squabbled over territory, he bounded in with loud, logical pronouncements about fair shares, his forceful presence amplifying their fear and turning a minor tiff into a shrieking standoff. Alara had to physically lead him away, her own patience fraying as she watched the conflict intensify. She realized abstract lectures on empathy were useless to a creature who learned through his paws and nose. So she changed her methods. She took him to a sun-dappled stream and told him to close his eyes, not to listen, but to feel how the water's flow changed around a stone, how it nourished the moss on one side and carved the earth on the other. "This is how energy moves," she explained. "It is not about right or wrong, but about finding the path of least resistance that still serves the whole." She gave him the tangible, the physical. She had him trace the path of a single sunbeam, from the highest leaf to the forest floor, feeling its warmth diminish as it was shared. She taught him to identify the specific frequency of a distressed sapling, a high, thin whine in the network versus the low, grumbling complaint of a compacted root. She was playing to his strengths as a hunter and tracker, translating the invisible into a trail he could follow. The true test of this new approach came when a young, anxious sapling began lashing a nearby beetle with its tender branches, mistakenly believing the insect was chewing on its roots. Kale, remembering the stream, did not charge in. He circled at a distance, his body low, his senses wide. He noted the sapling's frantic vibrations and the beetle's terrified, frozen stillness. Instead of issuing commands, he began to dig gently, a few paces away, uncovering a network of harmless fungal threads and showing them to the sapling. He then guided the beetle toward a fallen log rich with decaying bark, a much better meal. He had not solved a dispute. He had redirected a flow, watching the sapling's branches still and the beetle scuttle to safety. Alara felt a seed of hope for the future take root, a fragile but tenacious certainty that the forest's song would not fade with a single voice. The first frost was still a whisper on the wind when the great stag lifted his head, his crystalline antlers chiming with a note that resonated through every root and branch. It was time. The spirit herd gathered at the edge of the sun path clearing, their powerful forms humming with a contained energy that made the very air vibrate. This was the moment of truth, the first sanctioned migration under the new accords, and every being in the forest seemed to be holding its breath. From her vantage point high in an ancient oak, Alara watched, her hands resting on the rough bark. She could feel the tension radiating from the council members positioned along the route. The badger spirit was a coiled spring of watchfulness near a sensitive root system, while Silas and his spinners stood ready at their looms, prepared to dampen any disruptive frequencies. The pressure was a physical weight, the success or failure of their entire fragile piece, resting on this single, coordinated movement. As the herd began to flow forward, the forest responded. The ground trembled gently beneath their hooves, and the broad, sun-dappled pathways they had worked so hard to create did their job perfectly. Grasses flattened in their wake, and small stones were nudged from their ancient resting places. These were not signs of destruction, but the expected fingerprints of a powerful presence moving through a living world. A young sapling, whose branches were brushed by a passing stag, did not recoil in fear. Instead, it shivered with a new kind of vitality, its leaves flushing a deeper green as it absorbed the residual celestial energy left behind. There were no panicked clicks from the spinners, no furious barks from the guardians. The protocols held. The forest was not just tolerating the herd's passage, it was actively integrating it, the way soil absorbs a hard rain. Alara's instinct was to fly down, to mediate, to gently guide a stray yearling back to the path. But she forced herself to remain still, her heart pounding a rhythm of trust. She had to believe in the system they had built, in the understanding they had forged in each being. Her greatest contribution now was to not contribute at all, to prove that the harmony could sustain itself without her constant intervention. When the last of the glowing herd disappeared into the misty highlands, a profound and collective exhalation seemed to pass through the woods. The tension shattered, not into chaos, but into a quiet, buzzing wonder. The flattened grasses began to straighten, already enriched by the encounter. The shifted stones created new, interesting contours in the landscape. The forest felt not emptier, but profoundly richer for their passing, imbued with a foreign magic that was now a permanent part of its own song. This was not a peace enforced by rules, but a balance achieved through mutual respect and a shared vision for a more resilient world. The flawless migration was a living testament, a silent announcement that they had not merely ended a conflict, but had learned a new way to be. The quiet was its own kind of music. One evening, Ilara settled at the base of the Heartwood, her back against its warm, vibrant bark, and simply listened. At first, there was only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird, but as she stilled her own thoughts, a deeper symphony swelled into being. It was not a single melody, but a vast, interwoven tapestry of sound. The deep, resonant hum of the roots formed the bass line, a steady rhythm that pulsed with the forest's heartbeat. The mycelial network added a shimmering, intricate web of high-frequency communication. Like a million tiny chimes, streams gossiped with gurgling countermelodies, and the movements of every creature, from the tiniest beetle to the resting stags, wove in and out, a complex harmony of existence. This was the forest's true voice, a living, real-time expression of its health. A single sour note, a slight thinning in the fungal chorus, could signal a patch of compacted soil or a thirsty sapling long before any visible wilt appeared. It was a diagnostic tool of breathtaking sensitivity, yet its very complexity was a constant source of tension. Learning to interpret the song was a lifelong study. Was that faint, frantic rhythm in the roots a sign of a burrowing pest, or merely a family of badgers digging a new den? Misreading a natural fluctuation as a crisis could send the entire council into a panicked, unnecessary scramble. Worse, failing to detect a genuine, subtle warning, a persistent, discordant thrum from a distant grove, could allow a small imbalance to fester into a full-blown wound. The responsibility was immense. To manage it, Ilara initiated her greatest project yet. She began to create a living map of the song, a collaborative effort with the spinners and the mycelial network itself. The spinners wove a tapestry that visualized the sound's flow, using threads that changed color and texture to represent different frequencies and intensities. The mycelium provided the raw data, transmitting the feel of the song from every corner of the woods. This was not a static chart, but a dynamic, ever-changing document meant to be read, updated, and passed down to future harmonizers. Mastering this eternal song transformed her purpose entirely. She was no longer a crisis manager who rushed to put out fires. She had become a preventative caretaker, able to sense a coming storm in the subtle shift of the root hum long before the winds ever began to blow, to nourish a struggling patch of earth before it could turn barren. The map was a beginning, a way to ensure the harmonies would be remembered long after she was gone. The dawn light caught the crystalline curve of the great stag's antler as he lowered his head to her. A single tine, longer than her forearm, broke away with a chime like a distant bell, falling gently into her waiting hands. It was warm to the touch, and within its translucent depths, she could see swirling motes of gold from the plains and flecks of deep emerald from the forest, a perfect fusion of two worlds. This was not a mere token of friendship. It pulsed with a low, steady hum, a unique frequency born from the union of celestial energy and ancient, rooted life. She understood its power instinctively. This resonance could soothe a panicked heart or call the entire herd across vast distances, a living conduit to their shared strength. But such power was a double-edged blade. To rely on it for every minor dispute would make her authority a hollow thing, dependent on a tool rather than trust. It could become a crutch, weakening the very connections she sought to strengthen. Alara met the stag's ancient gaze, her own resolve firming. She would accept this profound gift, but with a vow sealed in silence. She would use it only when all other paths of mediation had failed, or when the forest itself faced a threat so great it demanded a unified voice. It was a promise to wield connection, never coercion. This single tine solidified her role as the living bridge, granting her a tangible tool for the challenges she knew still lay ahead. Holding the warm, pulsating crystal, she felt the immense weight of her responsibility settle upon her shoulders, but beneath it, a profound and unshakable strength. The strength of her allies, now literally in her hands. The idea for the Festival of Growth began as a quiet suggestion in the council, but it blossomed into a frenzy of joyful preparation. For the first time, the forest's energy was directed not toward survival or healing, but toward pure, unadulterated celebration. The spinners, usually focused on their diagnostic tapestries, now worked with iridescent threads, weaving delicate, floating lanterns that captured the laughter of sprites and the gentle hum of the stags. The mycelial network, in a breathtaking display, answered the collective joy by causing soft, blue bioluminescent fungi to bloom along every path and clearing, turning the forest floor into a mirror of the starry sky above. The great stag and his herd practiced the steps of the plains dance, their powerful movements adapted to the rhythm of the woods. Yet, organizing a party for such different beings was its own delicate dance. The spinners insisted on a complex, polyrhythmic melody for the main dance, a composition that left the badger spirits utterly bewildered and stomping in frustration. A minor crisis erupted over the communal feast, as the root gnawers declared the stag's preferred son, ripened moss, to be terribly bland, while the herd found the grubs offered by the badgers to be a shocking culinary choice. Alara, watching the debates with a smile, made a conscious choice. She would not mediate. She arrived at the festival as a guest, her only duty to participate. When the music began, a new song woven from the best of every faction's suggestions, she let herself be swept into the dance. She laughed as a young fox spirit, tried to mimic the stag's elegant steps, and tumbled over his own paws, and she felt a weight she hadn't known she was carrying lift from her shoulders as she spun under the glowing canopy. This was not a pause in her work, it was the heart of it. The festival's roaring success proved that their hard-won balance was not a fragile, solemn pact, but a living, breathing reality that had room for individuality, disagreement over food, and sheer, uncomplicated fun. As the spinners' lanterns rose into the starlit canopy, drifting up to dance among the leaves, Alara knew this was a memory that would sustain her through any future trial. The council's deliberation stretched long into the night, but Alara's gaze remained fixed on the distant, jagged peaks. The wind spirit's words had planted a seed of restless urgency in her soul, and it was already putting down roots. Her peaceful life, so carefully built, now felt like a single, beautifully tended garden in a world full of withering fields. How could she ignore a cry for help that so perfectly mirrored their own past despair? When the council finally summoned her, their decision was unanimous. The forest was stable, its new harmonies strong enough to endure her absence. Yet their blessing was heavy with unspoken fear. The mountains were a world of stone and storm, where the very air could freeze a song in your throat. Sending their heart, their bridge, into such a place felt like risking everything they had just saved. Elara accepted their decision with a solemn nod, but she laid down one non-negotiable condition of her own. She would not leave until a new Harmonizer was formally chosen and prepared to hold the threads of connection in her stead. The selection process was swift, guided by the forest's own subtle pull. It was Kale, the young fox spirit, who stepped forward. His journey from snarling skeptic to patient listener made him the ideal candidate. He understood conflict, not as an abstract concept, but as a force that lived in the gut, and he had learned to temper his fire with empathy. In the days that followed, Elara poured all her knowledge into him, walking him through the living map of the forest's song, teaching him to distinguish between a temporary squabble and a foundational crack. She showed him how to hold the great stag's crystalline tine, not as a weapon, but as a key. The weight of the coming journey settled upon her during these final preparations. This was not like crossing the open plains, where the sky was a vast, if alien, companion. The mountains were a labyrinth of sheer rock and unpredictable magic, a place where the songs of life were ancient, solitary, and fiercely guarded. To offer harmony, there would require a different kind of courage, one that she was not sure she possessed. On the eve of her departure, she stood once more beneath the Heartwood, listening to the complex, thriving melody of her home. It was a song worth protecting, worth extending. The whisper from the mountains was no longer a distant echo, but a clear, dissonant chord that demanded an answer. As the first light of dawn touched the highest leaves, Elara shouldered a small pack, gave a final, reassuring nod to Kale, and turned her face toward the unknown, the first step of a pilgrimage into silence. The council's decision settled like a final, gentle rain, soaking into the forest's roots. The Heartwood itself pulsed with a slow, steady light of affirmation. Their world was no longer a fragile sapling, but a resilient, deeply rooted tree. And so, with a collective breath held and then released, they named the fox spirit, Kale, as the new Harmonizer in training. Elara felt a peculiar mix of profound pride and a sharp, maternal fear. Letting go of the responsibility she had carried for so long was like asking a tree to release its grip on the earth that sustained it. Could his youthful fire truly be tempered into the patient, enduring warmth the center required? She watched him during a practice mediation between a family of chattering squirrels and a stoic, old badger, her every instinct screaming to step in, to guide his words. But she held her tongue, her hands clenched at her sides. To interfere now would be to undermine the very self-sufficiency she was trying to build. She had to trust not just him, but the entire system of connections they had woven together. This transition was the final, unspoken trial, the ultimate proof that their harmony was a living culture and not a cult of personality built around her. Her teachings became a torrent, a desperate attempt to pour a lifetime of subtle learning into a few short days. She showed him how to read the living map, to see the story told by a single, frayed thread in the spinner's tapestry. She gave him her personal journals, pages filled with not just facts, but the feelings, the failures, and the quiet triumphs that no map could ever capture. These were her most vulnerable thoughts, the record of her own doubts, and handing them over felt like giving him a piece of her own spirit. One thing, however, she kept. The great stag's crystalline tine remained secured at her side. That unique resonance was a key to a door she alone might need to open in the distant, silent mountains. It was a tool for a journey he was not yet ready to make. On the morning of her departure, she found Kale already studying the root song map, his head cocked as he traced a faint, new rhythm with a careful claw. He looked up, and in his eyes, she did not see the frantic uncertainty of the young student, but the calm, focused resolve of a guardian. It was that quiet confidence, more than any counseled decree, that finally stilled the anxious flutter in her heart. The forest would be in good hands. Her own path, leading away from the familiar chorus and toward the waiting silence, was now unmistakably clear. The forest did not let her leave empty-handed. Their farewell was a quiet ceremony at the foot of the Heartwood, a gathering charged with a love so fierce it felt like a physical pressure. Silas and the spinners came forward first, presenting a cloak that shimmered as if woven from twilight itself. Its threads were a fusion of shed spirit light from the herd and fibers from the forest's most resilient leaves, a garment that would shield her from both bitter cold and prying eyes. Next, the water sprites offered a skin crafted from a single, living lily pad, its interior humming with a gentle, purifying magic that would turn any murky stream or mountain runoff into clean, safe drink. Finally, the great stag himself lowered his head, and from the vibrant new bark of the Heartwood, a single seed, glowing with a soft green luminescence, was carefully plucked and placed into her waiting palm. It pulsed with a gentle warmth, a tiny, tangible piece of their world's core. These were not just supplies, they were promises. The cloak was their protection, the water skin their sustenance, and the seed their unshakable belief in her mission, a piece of home meant for foreign soil. As she accepted each gift, her throat grew too tight for elaborate speeches. The badger spirit, who had once charged her with territorial fury, simply grunted and nudged her leg with its broad head. Kale stood straight, his fox ears twitching, trying to look every bit the stoic Harmonizer, and failing miserably as his tail gave a single, anxious flick. She saw the same fear reflected in the stag's ancient eyes, the terror of sending their heart into the unknown. "I will send word," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The wind spirits will carry my voice back to you whenever they can." This promise was a fragile thread she would cling to in the silence ahead. With a final, deep breath, she turned her back on the thriving, humming forest. The path south stretched before her, a stark line between the familiar chorus of life and the waiting silence of the mountains. Her fingers closed tightly around the warm seed in her palm, a tiny anchor in the vast, terrifying unknown. Every lesson from the badger's rage, the singing vines, and the great stag's dance would now be tested. She was no longer a healer mending a broken home, but a pilgrim carrying its final, most fragile note into the heart of the world's dissonance. The mountains did not simply stand in silence, they roared. A seething wall of chaotic energy slammed into Alara the moment she crossed from the soft soil of the foothills onto the jagged, gray stone. It was not wind, but a physical pressure made of shrieking frequencies and discordant howls that clawed at her spirit, pushing her back with the force of a tidal wave. Her cloak of twilight flared, its woven magic straining to deflect the raw dissonance. To take another step felt like trying to walk through a solid, screaming wall. Her first instinct was to fight, to push back with her own power, to force a path. But the memory of the badger's charge and the Heartwood's weeping wound rose instantly in her mind. Force had always failed. It was the lesson written into her very bones. She closed her eyes against the onslaught, her body trembling with the effort to simply remain standing. She had to stop resisting. She had to listen, not to the chaos as a whole, but for a single, hidden component within it. She reached for the memory of the plains dance, letting the overwhelming pressure flow around her, through her, searching for its underlying rhythm, just as she had found the pattern in the stag's thunderous steps. She sank her awareness into the stone beneath her feet, using the song of the roots to feel for a vibration that was not pure destruction. And there, buried deep beneath the shrieking, she found it. A single, faint, and terrified note, a trembling frequency of pure quartz, deep within the mountain's heart, crying out for stability. It was the mountain's own hidden longing for order. This was the anchor. Drawing a breath that felt like swallowing glass, Ilara opened her heart and her voice. She did not sing a complex melody. She sang that one pure, stable note. She poured into it every lesson of empathy, every memory of trust, amplifying it with the resonance of the great stag's gift, the enduring strength of the Heartwood's seed, and the entirety of her own hard-won wisdom. She became a living lens, focusing all her being into that single tone. The chaotic storm recoiled, then intensified, lashing at her with renewed fury. The effort was excruciating, a spiritual hemorrhage that drained her energy with terrifying speed. She felt herself thinning, becoming translucent, her physical form beginning to unravel under the strain. This was not a battle she could win. It was a gift she had to give, even if it consumed her completely. Just as her consciousness started to flicker, the terrifying act of selfless creation ignited its spark. The single note she held did not break the storm. It gave the storm a center. The wild energies, starved for any form of stability, began to spiral around her unwavering tone, organizing themselves around that point of calm. The shrieking softened into a turbulent hum. The pushing pressure eased into a flowing current. She had not silenced the mountains. She had given them a new voice, a foundation upon which a future harmony could be slowly, carefully built. Exhausted to her very core, Ilara stood within the eye of the calm storm, the wild energies now weaving a new, raw pattern around the note she had sacrificed so much to provide. The spark Ilara had ignited in the mountains did not blaze into instant harmony. It grew as a slow, patient fire, a process she understood would take seasons, if not generations, to truly root itself in the stone. Her own role had transformed completely. She was no longer the healer of a single forest, but a keeper of balance for multiple, interwoven worlds, a pilgrim carrying the fragile gift of connection from one realm to the next. She learned that true growth was not a finish line to be crossed, but a continuous, active practice. It was the daily choice to listen deeply, to offer understanding before solutions, and to trust that every being, from a frightened badger to a raging mountain, held a hidden note waiting to join a greater song. The forest she had left behind did more than simply survive in her absence. It thrived. Under Kale's watchful care, the Council's decisions grew more confident, the alliances more resilient. The great stag's herd wove their celestial paths through the canopy, as naturally as the rivers flowed through the valleys, their presence no longer a marvel, but a fundamental part of the forest's identity. This thriving world was the ultimate testament to her life's work, proving that the most powerful harmonies are those that can sustain themselves, that echo long after the first note is sung. Ilara's own journey was far from over. New silences called to her from deserts of singing sand and oceans of liquid light, each one a new verse in the world's unfinished symphony. But she walked toward them now with a quiet confidence, a profound understanding born from every failure and every triumph. She carried the unshakable knowledge that even the smallest, most vulnerable note of genuine harmony, offered with a selfless heart, could eventually quiet the loudest, most terrifying dissonance. And she knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the earth beneath her feet, that every world, no matter how broken or silent, holds within its core the latent potential to find its own balance, to heal its own wounds, if only it is given the chance and the gentle, unwavering faith of a single, listening heart.